Today we're talking about the 9 people killed at the historic Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. One of the victims was the church's pastor, the Reverend Clementa Pinckney. He was also a state senator who recently appeared in the PBS documentary, The African Americans, Many Rivers to Cross. He talked about blacks and politics with host Henry Louis Gates Jr.
Why does black political participation matter so much? Why is it important?
Well, it's important for many reasons. One, we're impacted by the system. You know, what's the quote? Don't hate the player, hate the game. That's what it boils down to. We are in an American system where politics and money and the power that it generates controls and impacts our life. Not every aspect, but many aspects. From the eye drops that goes into a baby's eyes to how a death certificate reads, and nearly everything in the middle is impacted by the political process. So we need to be a part if we want to say in our own life, if we want to be independent, if we want to influence what's happening around us, or the reverse is to let everybody else control and influence, and then we just sort of take whatever comes. That's what slaves did. But, you know, we're not slaves. We're Americans, so we have responsibility to look at ourselves. Self-help, if you will. I also think that we have a historic legacy that we need to uphold. Whether it be Robert Smalls, R.H. Kane, other persons who were the first elected in this state. We need to be involved as they were involved. But so many unnamed persons, you know, the grandmother's prayer, Lord, let me be free, if not me, my children, if not my children, my children's children.
Deferred gratification.
Deferred gratification, you know. So we have an obligation. We have a legacy to uphold. The people who died so that we could have the right to vote, the people who sacrificed so that we could one day realize the dream of a black president, black elected officials, you know, after segregation. We have an opportunity. I think it does the memories of our people a disservice when we do not vote, if we do not vote, and if we buy into this whole idea that other people have perpetuated of saying our vote doesn't count. We don't have that. We don't have that choice. You know, we don't have that. We don't have that privilege to say our vote doesn't count, because history tells us differently.
We've been talking about the impact of the South Carolina church shootings. My guests are U.S. Attorney Barbara McQuade, Reverend Horace Sheffield III, and Agustin Arbulu. Reverend Sheffield, many of the victims talked about the forgiveness that they're ready to already offer to the perpetrator here. That struck me as
not only ready,
unusual.
that they actually, you know,
they said,
voiced their forgiveness.
I forgive Dylan.
I forgive you.
I have a lot of friends who reacted very negatively to that and felt like, why should that?
You know, we live in an era where the authenticity and integrity of Christianity is challenged anyway. People love Jesus but can't stand anybody else. And here are people who appropriated the ethos of Christ, who looked at his malefactors, who crucified him, and said, Father, forgive them.
Right.
Now, that takes a whole lot of Holy Spirit.
Sure. Holy
Spirit just not to help you, you know, get through the day or win the lottery. It's to help you deal with people in a loving way. Now, they didn't say they weren't hurt, they weren't mad. But one thing I want to point out that did bother me. It bothered me for the judge to spend as much time on equal footing what the family of Dylan was going through. I mean, I don't think that was an appropriate time for that. At some other point, not much of it was made, but if I'm in the courtroom and my mom and dad just got killed, and I'm forgiving
less interested in what the perpetrator's family is feeling.
And I know the family is going through much, because often, years after these things, families are held accountable for the deeds of their sons and daughters.
Right. I want to talk about the flag, the Confederate flag, which has become sort of the symbol of this incident, and there's been a lot of talk and focus on whether it should fly. in the Capitol grounds in South Carolina. Of course, lots of other states still have some form or version of the flag in their
Statues
flag.
of Jefferson Davis in the
Absolutely.
capitals.
I lived in Baltimore for a decade. There are many, many Confederate monuments all over the city, even though Baltimore technically wasn't even part of the Confederacy. Are these symbols? It was close. It was just over the line.
It is amazing that with this recent massacre, this killing, that Confederate flag sales have gone up. I noticed that somewhere it's gone up 3,000%.
Right.
What does that say about our society?
Well, is that, I mean, again, are these just symbols, or are they you know, proxies for more?
Well, symbols carry with them, you know, I keep using the word ethos. I mean, it's more than just a representation. I was moved by Strom Thurmond's son and the impassioned plea he made. I mean, the reality, anyone who suggests that this doesn't conjure up. My dad wrote a poem when he was 19 years old about Claude Neal in Greenwood, Florida. It's in the Detroit News, who was forced to eat his penis and testicles before he was hung. I mean, we know what this represents. Right. I'm old enough to remember segregation. My dad was in the movement, would go down there and disappear for months. So to act as if this is just celebrating a way of life, what was that way of life?
Right, right. Yeah.
You know what that way of life was.
What was it about, and what was the...
It was a tale of two worlds.
Right, right.
And the world that we lived in, that impinges upon a memory in such a way that we don't want to have a nightmare.
Yeah. From a legal perspective, how do you sort of make that distinction between something that is just a symbol and an expression of free speech, to be honest, and something that is a sign of hatred or you know, a threat of violence?
Yeah, well, in America, of course, we have the right to express even very disgusting thoughts, thoughts that are offensive and hurtful to other people. But it can certainly be used as evidence of a motive. If someone kills someone and they are using the Confederate flag just as if they are using the Al-Qaeda symbols, that certainly can be intent and evidence of another motive. Certainly a flag is used as a symbol to intimidate.
Yes.
And so if there's a goal under the domestic terrorism statute, one of the requirements is an intent to intimidate or coerce a civilian population. And so certainly use or display of a Confederate flag could be evidence of that intent.
Yeah, yeah. We keep talking about nationally the need to have a national conversation on race, to talk about inequality and sort of come to terms with these things. But I have to admit, a lot of times I'm not sure what that means. I mean, I think there is a lot of conversation about race, and it's something we do talk about. But what is it that we're not getting to?
I think this needs to be a conversation about whose America. You know, Langston, America, land of the free, home of the brave, America be America, because America's never been America to me.
Right.
I mean, I don't get caught up on color. I mean, I know racism exists. The question is fundamentally, who do we believe this country belongs to? And there's certain people who want to make that based on race or privilege or class. But the reality is that we live in a country where people fled the lack of freedom.
Yes.
And the lack of, you know, poor people being able to have ownership. So that's the conversation we need to have. Not whether, you know, there are fewer white men in power or more women displacing men. The question is, are we big enough to embrace everybody and to allow everyone to be included in this race for the American dream?
Yeah.
Well, do you think, though, Horace, that's what you're saying, though, when we face the realities of inequities, people have to address those issues. We cannot just ignore.
No, I'm not saying we don't address them. I'm simply saying is we start with what impinges upon the American dream without coming to some consensus that this is everyone's country.
Yeah.
And we all belong here.
Well, it's interesting you comment on that, because we then have to take a historical context, and race has played a dominant role.
Always in this country.
Always.
And so has class.
Yes.
I mean, you have peons and other folks who came here, indentured servants. I mean, the reality is we held out You know, bring me your tired, huddled masses yearning to be free. This is a country of unparalleled opportunity. And so as opportunity is narrowed because the economy is shrunk, then we want to constrict who we give access to. We've got to hold to the notion this country belongs to everybody.
Right. The Michigan Civil Rights Commission is dealing with this from you know, a social justice standpoint, but also from, again, a legal perspective, and trying to make sure that the law is applied in the right way.
Well, you know, the Civil Rights Commission for Michigan is Bill 1. It was created under the Michigan Constitution. And a lot of teeth is found in the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act. So that's where we base our powers, our focus on. But there's still so much more. We understand that we've got to also play a role in creating dialogues between law enforcement and the community throughout the state. And I know that we're playing a leading role there in sponsoring these gatherings, these conferences, outpacks, these combination of organizations, community-based, and police officers are coming in, so we can avoid those instances that we've seen elsewhere around the United States.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the ironies here. I mean, you have these tremendous strains between the African American community and law enforcement in a lot of places. Here, when something like this happens, I think African Americans are reminded of the important role that law enforcement has to play in dealing with hatred and its connection to our awful racial history.
Yeah, but community and police trust is always essential, because the police just can't be effective unless they have the trust of the community that they serve. So that's why we work at it with the Michigan Department of Civil Rights on things like All-Pact and having that dialogue with citizen groups. We want to know when police are acting improperly so that we can take corrective action, because we have to have that trust. Sometimes we have to arrest people, sometimes bad things happen, but if we want citizens to report when they're victims or witnesses to crime or have a tip, they need to trust police first.
And to have that faith in
But that's also a challenge still, because you're not only looking at African Americans, your Arab communities, the Latino communities. Building that trust takes time.
But you know, the real discrepancy was in how they were apprehended. The guy was apprehended, versus
we see
that's been pointed out too. I mean, it was mild mannered.
We could talk about this for hours. Thank you all for being here.